This week's Look Back At is another double feature as we take a look at John Carpenter's Escape From series. First up is of course 1981's Escape from New York, which is both a viewer's request and was already on my list to review as I thought I'd never seen it, until I rewatched it for this review and 30 seconds in remembered I actually had seen it around 15 years ago. Followed by the sequel 1996's Escape from LA, which as far as I'm aware I'm the only person alive who actually enjoys it, so I thought I'd kill two birds with one stone and do them both in one episode. On screen is a timestamp for when the review for Escape from LA starts if you would prefer to skip the review for Escape from New York. Escape from New York is a 1981 science fiction action film co-written, co-scored and directed by John Carpenter. We follow ex-soldier and current federal prisoner Snake Plissken, played by Kurt Russell, as he is given just 24 hours to go in and rescue the President of the United States from Manhattan Island, which in the near future world of 1997, where the crime rate has soared 400%, is a maximum security prison. If successful, Snake will be pardoned after Air Force One was hijacked by insurgents and purposely crashed into New York City. Very unusually for this series of lookbacks, this movie was a commercial and critical hit when it first released. Made on a small budget of $6 million, it went on to gross over $25 million at the box office. The critical consensus from Rotten Tomatoes, where the film holds an 86% fresh rating, reads, featuring an atmospherically grimy, futuristic metropolis, Escape from New York is a strange, entertaining jumble of thrilling action and oddball weirdness, which is a perfectly accurate description of this movie, in my opinion. Carpenter first wrote the script for the movie in 1976 after the Nixon-Watergate scandal, and as a response to the Iran hostage crisis. With Carpenter saying on his motivations for writing the movie, the whole feeling of the nation was one of real cynicism about the president. He was greatly influenced when writing the script by both Death Wish, which was hugely popular at the time, and Dirty Harry, saying those two movies involved men driven to the brink emotionally and who took it upon themselves to wreak vengeance on those who wronged them. Like those characters, Snake Plissken gets the job done, and this brought a lot of satisfaction to audiences as nobody in the real world seemed to be accomplishing anything. He actually spent several years shopping the script around, with most studios turning the script down flat. Following the success of Halloween, he was signed to a 2-picture deal by AFCO Embassy, with the first movie being The Fog. The second film was supposed to be The Philadelphia Experiment, but due to script writing problems, Carpenter rejected that and chose to do Escape instead. Escape from New York has been hugely influential on popular culture, being an influence for William Gibson, who is a pioneer of the cyberpunk genre of science fiction, when he wrote his 1984 novel Neuromancer. Hideo Kojima, the video game director behind the Metal Gear Solid series, has referenced the movie frequently in his work, with the biggest nod being the protagonist of the Metal Gear series being Solid Snake, whose alias is in fact Plissken. Even my arch nemesis, yes, J.J. Abrams himself, was inspired to crash the head of the Statue of Liberty into a street in his movie Cloverfield, inspired by the poster art for Escape.
You're tough. An asshole.
Having rewatched this, I have 3 main things to talk about really. Number 1 is the cast is fantastic. Lee Van Cleef of Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns fame is Bob Houck, the commander of the police. Isaac Hayes plays Duke, the ruler of New York. Donald Pleasence is the president, even though his accent sometimes slips into his natural English rather than American one, and of course Kurt Russell as Snake Plissken. And I don't care how cool you think you are, but you'll never be Kurt Russell as Snake Plissken in this film cool. We almost got a completely different version of that character though, as Carpenter himself wanted Clint Eastwood to play the part, and the studio wanted Charles Bronson or Tommy Lee Jones. I can't imagine what this movie would have been if any of those choices had come to pass. Secondly is the atmosphere that Carpenter managed to create on such a small budget. In this he was helped by the fact that East St. Louis in Illinois had actually had entire burnt out neighborhoods from a massive urban fire in 1976. Deborah Hill, the producer, said, "Block after block was burnt out rubble. In some places there was absolutely nothing, so that you could see 3 and 4 blocks away." Carpenter even managed to persuade the city to shut off electricity to 10 blocks at a time in the evening so that they could film. It gave Manhattan such a realistic, rundown, lived-in, ruined feel to the point that the city itself is almost a character. In fact, only one shot of New York was used in the entire film. One of the Statue of Liberty itself, which was shot on location, then a pan fade was used into a backlot set scene. All the other shots of the movie were matte paintings created by James Cameron. Yes, the director James Cameron, who was working as a special effects artist for Roger Corman's New World Pictures at the time. Carpenter wanted 2 distinct feels for the film. The first was obviously the run-down, dirty city, and the second was, he himself said, the police state, high-tech, lots of neon, a United States dominated by underground computers. Due to the cost of actual computer-generated images in the early 80s, the computer images throughout the film are actually a scale model of New York with reflective tape filmed under blacklight to create the impression of a 3D computer-generated image. I also love the little touches that this movie has too, such as the fact that Duke's car has chandeliers on the hood. That is one pipped out post-apocalyptic car. The third and final aspect of the movie is its obvious political satire, which as always with Carpenter is about as subtle as a sledgehammer to the face, and yet is seemingly clairvoyant in its unerring accuracy. The very first scene is the militarized police blowing to pieces 2 people as they try to escape poverty and deprivation on Manhattan Island for a better life outside of its 50-foot high walls. The absolute obvious parallels with the many immigrants trying to do the same now, and the ever-increasingly fraught ways various authorities try to stop them, up to and including building a wall. The very scene after that is a terrorist organization crashing a plane into New York, because it is a symbol of the United States, just like terrorists did in real life on 9/11 with very similar motivations. Finally, it also predicted the massive rise in the incarceration rate in the United States, to the point they'd need to build such an outlandish prison in the first place. With the US prison population being under 500,000 when this was written, and it is now above 2 million people, although actual crime rates have plunged across the world in that time. As well as all the above, there are some fun action scenes throughout, the best of which is the fight between Russell and the wrestler Ox Baker, where they swing spiked clubs at each other inside a boxing ring as they fight to the death. There is actually a remake in production with Robert Rodriguez set to direct, slated to release in 2021. I honestly don't know how I could have forgotten ever seeing this film. It has an amazingly realistic world, a fantastic ensemble cast, one of the most iconic film characters of all time, and it literally predicted the future, all whilst creating a totally believable world. It absolutely holds up to scrutiny, even almost 4 decades on, and I highly recommend it to anyone.
You gotta smoke. The United States is the no-smoking nation. No smoking, no drinking, no drugs, no women. Unless, of course, you're married. No guns, no foul language, no red meat. Land of the free.
I must have seen Escape from LA more than a dozen times, but hadn't seen it in more than a decade, and had very fond memories of it. Having rewatched it for the purpose of doing this look back, it hasn't aged as well as a much older original. I'll get into reasons why later. Escape from LA is a 1996 American post-apocalyptic action film, again co-written, co-scored and directed by John Carpenter, with Kurt Russell returning as Snake Plissken and joining Carpenter in co-writing the script. A sequel script was actually commissioned by Carpenter in 1985, which is unusual for him, as he has written or co-written almost all of his movies. Coleman Luck indeed wrote a script, but Carpenter shelved the project, feeling the script was too cheesy, light and campy. It was only due to the persistence of Russell, who really wanted to return to play the character of Snake, that the sequel was made in the mid-90s. Carpenter found writing the sequel difficult, stating everything he wrote was bullshit. In 2013, the United States President, played by Cliff Robertson, is exiling all citizens who don't conform to his hyper-conservative views to Los Angeles, which became an island after a huge earthquake. But when the president's daughter nabs the detonator to her dad's apocalyptic weapon and sneaks into LA to be with the rebel leader she loves, the government taps commando-turned-crook Snake Plissken, played by Kurt Russell, to retrieve the young woman, played by A.J. Langer, who actually retired from acting in 2004 when she married into the British aristocracy and is in fact now the Countess of Devon. Unlike the original Escape movie, this received a mixed critical reception and was a box office bomb, only recouping $25.5 million on a budget of $50 million. The consensus on Rotten Tomatoes, where the film holds a 54% approval rating, reads, "Escape from LA has its moments, although it certainly suffers in comparison to the cult classic that preceded it." Unlike Escape from New York, which only had one shot of New York in it, Escape from LA was shot entirely on location over 103 nights in LA. On the failure of Escape from LA, Carpenter has said, "Escape from LA is better than the first movie, 10 times better. It's got more to it, it's more mature, it's got a lot more to it. I think some people didn't like it because they felt it was a remake, not a sequel. I suppose it's the old question of whether you like Rio Bravo or El Dorado better. They are essentially the same movie. They both had their strengths and weaknesses. I don't know. You never know why a movie's going to make it or not. People didn't want to see Escape that time, but they really didn't want to see The Thing. You just wait. You've got to give me a little while. People will say, what was wrong with me?" I agree hugely that this is more a remake of the original than a traditional sequel. The plot beats are exactly the same as the original, just a little bit bigger and on a more spectacular scale, which is probably why I loved this when I was younger. I disagree, however, that it is a better movie than the original. It's a more fun, action-packed film than Escape from New York, but it has not aged anywhere near as well. Although the film was shot entirely on location, it doesn't have the same realistic, grimy look that New York did. It looks like a dressed set. Streets look like they've just had trash placed in them and burning cans placed too precisely along the street, as if it was a set. The original looked like a real ruined city because essentially that's exactly what it was. Another reason this hasn't aged as well are the special effects, which just look very mid-90s, where filmmakers had largely abandoned practical effects in favour of digital effects, and they look awful, almost 25 years on, whereas the original's effects are effectively timeless. The other major reason that the sequel didn't age as well as the original is the fact that the satire in Escape from LA is satirising the action films of the early to mid-90s and Hollywood itself, with such ridiculous characters such as the Surgeon General of LA, played by Bruce Campbell, and Eddie the Map to the Stars, played by Steve Buscemi. As time passes, it becomes less relevant and more dated as opposed to the satire in the first movie, which was entirely socio-political and is ever more prescient. Escape from LA is still a good time though. It has some great, campy, almost comic book characters, the action is bigger, and there's more of it than the first movie, and it has Steve Buscemi and Bruce Campbell in it, and everything is instantly improved by them appearing. Had Escape from LA done well, there were plans to do a third film in the series called Escape from Earth, which for obvious reasons never happened. So that's the Escape series, one an unmistakable classic, the other a much maligned sequel, and fairly so in many respects, but I still love it.